Turns out John Kerry, like Barack Obama, is what they call a climate denier. How do we know that? Well, because like Obama, John Kerry recently purchased a $12 million waterfront home on the island of Martha's Vineyard. So obviously he's not really worried about rising sea levels.
The passive indifference that most countries are accepting is basically a mutual suicide pact. That's what people are on right now, because we are not doing what is necessary to save the planet.
He is not helping the forgotten American. He is hurting them. Their kids will have worse asthma in the summer.
President Trump pulling out of the Paris Agreement, that is going to cost lives. That's not a simple political move. People are going to die because of the decision he made.
Roll it up, roll it up. So Joe Biden wants to spend a lot of the next 4 years talking about climate. What's interesting is that climate is very low on every survey of voters' actual concerns. They're worried about things like paying off their debt. Many people are drowning in debt. They're worried about relatives who are dying of drug ODs. They're worried about a stalled economy. So why do they keep talking to us about this? Have they not learned anything in the past 4 years? J.D. Vance has thought more about this subject than virtually anyone. He's the author of the famous book Hillbilly Elegy. A movie version of it is currently airing in theaters. Will begin streaming tomorrow. We wanted to ask him these questions. J.D. Vance joins us now. J.D., thanks so much for coming on. Before I ask you about the movie, let me ask you about the kind of central place in the elite liberal mind occupied by climate. They've never succeeded in convincing the population that this should be a top concern. Why is that?
Well, I think because people recognize they're fundamentally unserious. You know, people may not be experts on the details of environmental policy, but I think most people recognize that if you're lecturing the average American about how much they drive their car, but you're letting the two biggest polluters in the world, China and India, basically do whatever they want to, then you're not interested in environmental damage. You're interested in gaslighting. And so I think when people like John Kerry try to preach about the importance of self-denial to save the climate, and then go and buy a $13 million mansion and say nothing to China and India, people just recognize they're full of crap.
But they keep trying. I mean, every time they speak, and certainly every time they get power, they're coming up with a new scheme. These are people who, by the way, hate nature, are at war with nature, not interested in the actual environment at all. But climate is always at the top of their plans. What's in it for them? Why?
Well, it's a pretty complicated question. I'll give you one part of my answer, which is that I think it's a quasi-religious phenomenon, right? I think what a lot of these people have is they've lost any sense of real religious faith. And so their sense of virtue is very often tied up in self-denial around the climate. If they don't drive their car, they don't go to certain places, they take certain actions that are perceived as virtuous, it's at least an organizing principle around which they can kind of organize their life. I think a lot of people who maybe care about the environment in a very real way recognize that that sort of religious approach to this issue just doesn't make any sense. But I also think there's just a component of basic power going on here. If you look at the agenda that's being pushed by people who care the most, or at least claim that they care the most about the environment, it's very often making industries that are very important in the heartland, like oil and natural gas, more economically troubled, and it's making other industries like digital technology easier to sort of push and make the centerpiece of an American economic policy. So I think in a lot of ways, these people's sort of sense of virtue and sort of self-interest align and intersect in a way that makes the environmental issue pretty tough to bring any rationality to.
I think that's nicely put. So you wrote one of the best-selling books of your generation, no exaggeration, in Hillbilly Elegy, which is exactly right. The reviews I have read object to the idea of chronicling the lives of people who they think should just shut up and go away or die. And so I commend you for telling their story in a way that millions of people saw. I think it's really important. J.D. Vance, congrats on the movie.
Thanks, sir.